The Subcommittee on Workforce Protections will come to order. I note that a quorum is present. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to call a recess at any time. The Subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on the Occupational Safety and Health Administration's policies and priorities. The Department of Labor's Occupational Safety and Health Administration has a vital mission. The agency is charged with protecting the rights of American workers and supporting employers in meeting health and safety standards. Unfortunately, OSHA has veered from this mission. It has taken its eye off the ball when it comes to protecting worker safety, focusing instead on political goals that could not win support through the democratic channels of our government. The result has been harmful and ill-considered policies that have compromised our system of checks and balances and weakened our economic competitiveness, while at the same time depriving workers of important protections. It bears emphasizing that our witness today, Mr. Parker, along with Julie Su, the unconfirmed acting Secretary of Labor, previously served in California government as appointees of Governor Gavin Newsom. Mr. Parker was chief of the Division of Occupational Safety and Health, known as Cal OSHA, for the first 2 years of the COVID-19 shutdown. During that time, the actions of Cal OSHA faced broad bipartisan criticism and sometimes bordered on the nonsensical. For example, in June of 2021, Cal OSHA proposed a rule that employees could go without masks in the workplace if and only if every worker present was vaccinated. So a single identified unvaccinated employee would cause all employees to have to wear masks. Many described it as the worst conceivable policy. The rule was so widely criticized that Cal OSHA reversed itself the following week, but still forced employers to collect vaccination information from employees. It was indicative of the uncertainty and irrationality that marked the COVID experience for businesses and workers in the state. Indeed, Cal OSHA was widely criticized for its role in what by any objective measure was the nation's least successful handling of pandemic workplace policies. California had the most onerous business lockdowns and mandates in the country throughout the COVID era, resulting in the highest unemployment of any state in the country. Still to this day, California ranks 49 out of 50 in employment. At the same time, the state had one of the worst public health records, with an age-adjusted excess mortality rate well above the national average. Beyond COVID, an NPR investigation found that Mr. Parker's agency also failed to protect workers from wildfire smoke, with required safeguards neglected. This perverse formula, policies that undermine both economic vitality and public health, has unfortunately now become characteristic of OSHA at the federal level. Mr. Parker and Ms. Su have taken California's lose-lose approach national. For example, shortly after Mr. Parker was sworn in as Assistant Secretary, OSHA published an emergency rule on workplace COVID-19 vaccination. The rule required employers with a total of 100 or more employees to develop, implement, and enforce a mandatory COVID-19 vaccination policy. Within 2 months, the Supreme Court ruled that OSHA had exceeded its authority in an unprecedented way. The court explained, "It is telling that OSHA, in its half-century of existence, has never before adopted a broad public health regulation of this kind, addressing a threat that is untethered in any causal sense from the workplace. Policies like the one OSHA attempted to impose," the court continued, "are the responsibility of those chosen by the people through democratic processes. Although Congress has indisputably given OSHA the power to regulate occupational dangers, it has not given that agency the power to regulate public health more broadly. Requiring the vaccination of 84 million Americans certainly falls in the latter category." Despite this rebuke from the High Court on a matter of profound public interest, and despite the absence of a confirmed Secretary of Labor, OSHA has proceeded with an aggressive regulatory agenda. This includes 23 new regulations expected within the next year, with an additional 6 under consideration for future action. Incredibly, here in 2023, OSHA continues to list a potential final rule on, quote, occupational exposure to COVID-19 in healthcare settings, even though President Biden has signed legislation declaring the national emergency to be over. While many of the proposed regulations nominally concern important and appropriate topics, such as protecting workers from heat or updating injury reporting requirements, there are clear signs that the agency has other objectives in mind. For instance, serious worker privacy concerns have been expressed in relation to the electronic injury reporting regulation. And another rule blurs the line between health inspections and organizing campaigns. Nothing could be more antithetical to the mission of OSHA than using health and safety as a pretext for other political designs. This usurps the role of Congress and risks leaving workers without the protections they are entitled to by law. In fact, genuine worker protection measures have been deprioritized and delayed, such as the tree care standard and the lockout-tagout standard to protect workers from the dangers of hazardous energy. Moreover, despite having tens of millions more in funding, the total number of OSHA inspections in fiscal year 2022, the most recent year with complete data, lags the total number in fiscal years 2017, 2018, and 2019. And sadly, OSHA's lack of focus on worker protections is showing up in nationwide data. In 2021, the total reported injuries increased by 6.3% to 2.2 million cases, up from 2.1 million cases in 2020. The fatal work injury rate was 3.6 fatalities per 100,000 full-time equivalent workers, the highest annual rate since 2016. To carry out its aggressive yet counterproductive agenda, OSHA is seeking a 17% budget increase. That's a $106.4 million increase in funding, bringing its total budget request to $738.7 million. Tellingly, this includes a 55% increase in funding not for advancing worker protections, but rather for OSHA's office responsible for writing regulations. Congress has a constitutional responsibility to use its oversight authority and appropriations power to rein in executive agencies, refocus their mission, and assure funds are spent efficiently and appropriately. That is the purpose of today's hearing, to refocus OSHA on its core mission, so that a thriving workforce can coexist with robust workplace protections. With that, I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Kiley. First of all, I want to thank Assistant Secretary of Labor for Occupational Safety and Health, Mr. Doug Parker. Thank you for your time. Look forward to hearing your testimony. There's no question that the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, is our nation's main line of defense against unsafe working conditions. In the 53 years since OSHA was created in 1970, worker injuries have fallen significantly, and deaths from acute traumatic injuries have likewise come down sharply. Unfortunately, too many workers continue to be injured, made ill, or killed on the job. A worker either gets sick or injured on the job every 2.5 seconds and can even succumb to death every 8 minutes because of unsafe working conditions. Thanks to recent news investigations, we also know that children, especially unaccompanied migrant children, have been suffering all manner of harms in jobs that they should not be working on in the first place. But take a closer look at those stories. Chemicals so caustic that they burn through multiple layers of gloves, machines without guards to prevent people's arms or hands from getting mangled, food dust and cleaning chemical fumes that irritate the sinuses and lungs. These stories are not only about children in desperate circumstances, they're also about workplaces that are dangerous to people of all ages. But workers are losing their lives not because of so-called government overreach or tyranny. They're losing their lives to preventable hazards because of employer negligence and lack of funding from Congress. Since fiscal year 2010, funding for OSHA has dropped by nearly 20%. And in 2021, the number of OSHA inspectors was already near its lowest level ever. Thankfully, under President Biden's leadership, OSHA has taken important steps to fulfill its promise to America's workers. Most recently, OSHA moved to clarify that workers may authorize another worker or third party, including a union representative, to join a walk-around inspection to aid in identifying and resolving hazards. OSHA has also issued a final rule to improve accountability that would require large employers in high-hazard industries to submit detailed information about their workplace illnesses and injuries. It is disappointing to hear my colleagues proclaim that they care about workplace safety and then push for legislation like the Nullify Occupational Safety and Health Administration Act to abolish the leading federal office designed to ensure safe and and healthful working conditions for our workforce. It's disappointing, but not surprising. We are just days from a Republican-led shutdown of the government that would limit OSHA's workplace inspections, put workers at risk, and delay workers' paychecks. But let's be clear. Republicans' price to keep the government open is a set of extreme budget cuts to investments that help workers and families. Republican appropriators already proposed cutting OSHA's budget by $95 million, but that's not extreme enough. Republicans want to turn back the clock and reinstate spending levels from several years ago. And this would have a devastating impact on OSHA. According to the Department of Labor, House Republicans' proposed budget cutbacks would slash OSHA's budget by 22%, causing OSHA to lose at least 270 inspectors and conduct 10,800 fewer inspections. That would be the lowest level of enforcement in OSHA's 52-year history. And we've seen news reports since then about even steeper cuts that rob OSHA of even more capacity. No matter where someone works, the most basic right for American workers is that they're safe at work and come home at the end of their shift. Congress should not be turning a blind eye to employer workplace violations and should not be turning its back on our workers. My Democratic colleagues and I remain committed to ensuring safe workplaces for all Americans. For example, Ranking Member Scott, Representative Rahalva, and I joined Representative Julie Chu to reintroduce legislation that provides an enforceable workplace safety standard for heat stress to protect indoor and outdoor workers against excessive heat on the job. Ranking Member Scott and I also introduced the Protecting Children Act to address abusive child labor by providing OSHA with the resources to deter violations and prevent harm to children from intensive work in dangerous jobs. And Representative Courtney and Ranking Member Scott reintroduced the Protecting America's Workers Act, which provides OSHA with the tools to enforce worker safety and to hold employers accountable. With that, I want to thank our witnesses again for their time. I look forward to a productive discussion, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, all committee members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m. After 14 days from the date of this hearing, which is October 11th, 2023. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days after the date of this hearing to allow such statements and other extraneous material referenced during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. I note for the subcommittee that my colleague from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg, and my colleague from New Jersey, Mr. Norcross, waive onto the subcommittee for the purpose of today's hearing. I'll now turn to the introduction of our distinguished witness. Mr. Douglas L. Parker is the Assistant Secretary of Labor for Occupational Safety and Health within the U.S. Department of Labor in Washington, D.C. We thank the witness for being here today and look forward to your testimony. Pursuant to committee rules, I would ask that you limit your oral presentation to a 5-minute summary of your written statement. I would also like to remind the witness to be aware of his responsibility to provide accurate information to the subcommittee. I will now recognize Mr. Parker.
Thank you. Chairman Kiley, Ranking Member Adams, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today to highlight how the Occupational Safety and Health Administration is helping to ensure that our nation's workers have safe and healthy workplaces. OSHA's vision for good, safe jobs is one where every workplace in America embraces health and safety as a core value. This approach requires strategies that encourage leadership from the business community, management systems that find and fix hazards, and active worker participation. No one's job should jeopardize their safety or health. As part of our vision, OSHA focuses its enforcement on the causes of frequent injuries and illnesses, high hazard industries, and employers that demonstrate a lack of regard for safety. Our areas of focus include our national emphasis program on heat illness, a new initiative on warehousing, and another on the dangers facing workers who cut and shape materials in many kitchen countertops, which contain high levels of silica and cause aggressive and deadly lung disease. We are also increasing enforcement at businesses where we find repeated safety issues. to incentivize employers to make meaningful investments in workplace safety to address the root causes of recurring hazards. We have also expanded our whistleblower protection program, enabling us to resolve more cases and to do it faster. Just this year, the average age of a pending case has dropped by 36%, thanks to these efforts. To make workplaces safer, we must recognize the importance of worker involvement in health and safety. Employers who treat workers as partners in making workplaces safer see positive results in both safety and their bottom line. But not all workers, especially those in underserved communities, have this opportunity. I've talked to Latino women from Texas in the construction industry facing sexual violence and coercion on the job. I've talked to Black workers from Mississippi who can only get hired for the most dangerous and dirty jobs and are injured on hazardous equipment without any protections or training. Talked to an immigrant worker from Philadelphia who lost his leg from a treatable infection because his employer threatened to fire him if he left work to get treatment. These stories are why we are dedicated to fighting to make worker rights a reality for everyone, every day. We are also proud of our outreach efforts to employers, associations, and small business. We cannot make meaningful progress without listening to and learning from employers and supporting their efforts to build strong safety cultures. OSHA has conducted, through its on-site consultation programs, almost 20,000 site visits, eliminating hazards for more than 2.6 million workers, which provide free safety and health assistance to employers through state programs. Our Susan Harwood training grants awarded nearly $13 million to help train workers and employers, including small businesses and underserved workers with limited English skills. And we have worked closely with employers and unions to address a range of mental health issues affecting workers and workplaces, creating tools for employers and welcoming more than 36,000 businesses to help us kick off our Safe and Sound Workplace mental health campaign. To better protect workers, OSHA is also developing proposed rules to address heat illness, infectious disease, and workplace violence in healthcare as well. We are also developing a standard to protect tree care workers, among others. We strongly encourage the public to comment on all these rules to ensure they are both effective and practical. This summer, we propose rules to ensure all construction workers get personal protective equipment that fits them, as well as a rule clarifying the rights of workers to be represented in an OSHA inspection. Workplaces are safer when workers are active participants in solving health and safety problems at work. We appreciate Congress's support over the years to ensure workers in your districts and across the country can come home to their families after each workday. However, to truly embrace health and safety as a core value requires a strong OSHA. A government shutdown followed by significant budget reductions would severely compromise our ability to protect workers and meet our congressional mandates. Workers across this country depend on OSHA to keep them safe, and I hope Congress can provide us with the tools and resources needed to do so. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions and this discussion.
Under Committee Rule 9, we will now question witnesses under the 5-minute rule. I recognize the representative from Illinois, Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Chairman Kiley. Assistant Secretary Parker, in November of 2021, OSHA released an emergency temporary standard that would have forced 84 million Americans to take an experimental COVID vaccine or provide their private medical paperwork to their employer. Do you think OSHA has the power to force 84 million Americans to take an experimental vaccine?
You're referring to the vax and test rule that OSHA promulgated in November of 2021. It did require businesses of 100 or more employees to develop a program that would require employees to either take the COVID vaccine or get regular testing.
Yes, so what I want to know is if you believe that OSHA actually has the power to force 84 million Americans to do that.
Well, the Supreme Court ruled on that matter.
Yes,
and
thank
ruled-
God the Supreme Court ruled on that and stopped you from doing that. You're an unelected bureaucrat, and you do not have the power to force 84 million people to take an experimental vaccine or show their papers. You tried to fire 84 million American workers, but do you believe the court was wrong?
You know, the court made the final decision on the matter. That's how our judicial system works.
And after they
it's
made
about
that decision,
finality.
after they made that decision, you actually said to Reuters, this is a quote, "The ruling was unfortunate, but it's not stopping us from pressing employers to take adaptive measures to keep things in place." So did you continue to threaten companies to impose a vaccine mandate, even though the Supreme Court told you that you couldn't? And Chairman, I'd like to enter that into the record.
Without objection.
No, we didn't threaten anyone, but there were companies that were looking forward to clarity from the government about these rules and to
They
provide
got
them.
the clarity from the Supreme Court, and you ignored them and continued to press companies to fire American workers. And we are curious. What was President Biden and OSHA's plan if 84 million Americans refused to comply with the vaccine mandate or show their papers?
That's categorically untrue. We didn't threaten anyone, and we didn't demand that anyone be fired.
You absolutely
complied
were
with the
promoting
law.
that. The Supreme Court stopped you, thank God. And in light of considering what would have happened if Americans refused to comply, what was your plan?
Congresswoman, I believe that the American people expect their government to take on the big problems that are facing them. More than 1 million people
Well, I'd just like to
died
say,
from
you are
COVID.
inept. It would have terrorized our economy if the American workers refused to comply, and it would have put 84 million American workers out of work. But now I'm troubled that you're targeting farmers in your quest for power and threatening to shut down the agriculture industry because it's hot outside in the summer through your new heat standard. Have you ever worked on a farm or run a farm?
I have done some work on a farm, yes.
Yes, and right now you actually sit in Washington, D.C. as an unelected bureaucrat. I don't believe you've ever produced anything. Have you ever produced anything on a farm?
I was a helper on a farm, but I spent a lot of time sharpening tomato stakes.
In your garden.
No, it was a
But
business.
Anyway, now you want to tell farmers how to farm and tell Americans which big pharma shots they must take. I'm going to introduce amendments to strip you of your power and funding to protect the 84 million Americans who do not want to show you their vaccine papers and to protect farmers who feed Americans. Mr. Chairman, OSHA needs to be reined in. They have gone far beyond their minor limited mission. Thank you, and I yield back.
What did you mean just now when you said that you weren't going to force anyone to be fired? What do you mean by that?
There was a statement by the Congresswoman that we had made threats that employers fire workers after the Supreme Court decision for not getting vaccinated. At least that's how I understood it. And I was just making clear that we made no such threats, then that we complied with the decision of the Supreme Court fully.
I now recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Assistant Secretary Parker, heat is the leading cause of weather-related deaths in the United States. Earlier this month, a farm worker in my state was working when the heat index was in the high 90s, and he fell ill. He died at just 30 years old. According to his family, workers weren't provided enough water during the day, and I'm sure you've heard many stories like this. OSHA has had several initiatives underway to educate employers and workers about heat stress and to conduct enforcement. What are these efforts and how successful are they?
Heat is one of the major health hazards facing American workers. And we have been diligent in our efforts to ensure that we are doing the outreach that we need to do, the communication that we need to do with both employers and workers to ensure that they are doing everything that they can to protect themselves from the hazards of heat. In April, we launched a national emphasis program to protect workers from heat illness. We have, in the course of that program, conducted more than 4,300 heat-related inspections across the country, not including inspections that have happened in state plans that have adopted this program. That has been mainly focused on outreach. And so in the first year of that program, we really focused on educating employers and workers about the hazards of heat and the basics of how to put together a practical heat prevention program that would protect workers. But we have also conducted enforcement. We've issued a number of citations. We've primarily issued hazard alert letters, which are warnings, more than 400, alerting employers that their programs are deficient and that they need to do more to protect workers, and that includes just basics like providing cool water and shade and those sorts of things. We're also working diligently on a proposed rule to protect workers from heat illness. We have made extraordinary efforts to get public feedback and input from industry to make sure that we have a workable rule that can address a number of complex issues.
So let me move on a moment. You've had mixed results in recent years in using the general duty clause to bring enforcement cases about heat. So what are the challenges of enforcement when you don't have a standard on the books, and do you have a standard in development, but I understand it might be on slow track. So what's the current status of the rulemaking, and when is the earliest that you could project issuing a proposed rule?
Well, the general duty clause is an important tool, but it's very difficult to address a national problem using the general duty clause because of the variety of things, the variety of elements that you have to prove in each case on an individual basis.
So if the government is shut down, what would that mean for your enforcement, education, and standard development on heat stress?
Well, there won't be any rulemaking activity on heat illness. Our outreach activities will end. Our assistance to employers will end. Our development of materials to address heat illness will end. And our ability to conduct proactive programmed inspections like the ones that I just described to protect workers in hazardous conditions will end. We'll be limited to a more reactive mode. And unfortunately, that only happens after a worker has the courage to complain or a worker is already sick or dead from heat.
So I've heard from employers in my district about the value of standards to set rules of the road for themselves and their competitors. One standard in development I've heard from constituents about is the tree care operations rule. So what is the current status of that rulemaking if, of course, the shutdown occurs?
There would be no further activity on the tree care standard if there were a shutdown. That and all other rulemaking would pause for the term of the shutdown, and it wouldn't just be the effects of the amount of time that it would be shut down. It would have ripple effects because of the impact on the work stream.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I recognize the representative from North Carolina and chair of this full committee, Dr. Fox.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witness for being here today. Mr. Parker, in its latest proposed rule, OSHA is rewriting the agency's regulation to allow third parties to accompany OSHA inspectors during a job site inspection. This expands those who can participate beyond safety engineers and industrial hygienists, as outlined under current regulations. Under the proposed rule, a third party could include a representative from a worker advocacy group, community organization, or labor union. What sense does it make for OSHA to allow individuals who know nothing about workplace safety to accompany inspectors at a job site?
Well, the rule is currently proposed, ma'am. Thank you for the question, and welcome to the subcommittee. The rule is currently proposed would not have that effect. The rule currently has been construed by some to limit participation to employees of the employer as the representative of workers that can participate in inspection. And so even a union official who was the international safety representative had great expertise in health and safety. Those individuals have been excluded by employers from inspections because they're not an employee of the employer. And so we're trying to fix that. It's a common sense issue so that if a union has a representative who's a health and safety expert, they can participate. We have also expanded.
But they have to be an expert in the area. Is that correct? Is that the way it's going to be?
They have to be able to make a contribution to the inspection. So that could be through.
Well, there's a difference in that and what you just said. They have to be an expert in the area.
That's correct. I was just giving one example. The
Okay.
rule itself is a little broader than that.
But is that rule intended to help union organizing campaigns?
No, ma'am. Our only focus is on health and safety.
On safety, okay? 74 trade groups have asked you to extend the comment period for the proposed rule on walk-around representatives by 60 days in order to provide the regulated community with sufficient time to analyze the proposed rule and assess its potential impact on businesses. Will you grant this request to extend the comment period?
I've not analyzed that question yet. If there's a government shutdown, the impact of a 60-day delay on top of that would have pretty grave consequences on getting this rule done. And so that would certainly be a factor in our decision-making.
Well, if is a big issue, big word. Oversight's important in this committee, but your agency has not always been responsive to our requests. Last year, starting on September 27, OSHA hosted a 3-day Workers' Voice Summit. This event was held just over a month before Election Day. It included a select group of participants who politically support the administration, but it was closed to other stakeholders. When I wrote my first oversight letter to you about this event, I expressed my concerns that this event sounded like a pep rally for the Biden administration and congressional Democrats. Now, a second oversight letter, and a year later, we still have no answers to our questions. Will you commit to providing complete answers to the questions in these oversight letters within 1 week of this hearing?
Ma'am, I will work with our congressional team and our attorneys who are responsible for those responses to make sure that we are providing an appropriate response to any follow-up. I will say this about the Worker Voice Summit. You weren't here for my oral testimony, but I was telling stories of workers who had tragic situations at work and had been exposed to hazards, had been harassed, had seen tragic events. Those were the people who were at that Worker Voice Summit. That was an opportunity to hear from rank-and-file workers from around the country about their experiences on the job, and for us to be able to listen to them. And it was one event, an important event. It was no pep rally. We had some hard questions to answer from these workers about what we were doing.
Well, why could you not hear those comments and concerns without having a rally or a big meeting?
It was an event that occurred in both a question and answer forum as well as in some smaller group discussions, but it was hardly a rally or in that sense.
But you could have had those, you could have heard those on an individual basis or in a Zoom call or in any number of ways other than bringing a large group of people together and calling it a summit.
You know, I meet all the time.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The
with
witness may answer.
employers.
Thank you.
The witness may answer.
I meet all the time with employers and employer associations I meet with unions who ask for meetings. We've never had a meeting with rank and file workers to hear their needs. I get to meet with them when I travel, but people are always saying that Washington's isolated, you're not listening to people. So we had this event to listen to people, and that's what the event was about. It wasn't anything surreptitious. It wasn't about, it wasn't an organizing. It was to hear some hard stories and some criticisms from rank and file workers who want us to do a better job reaching the most vulnerable among them.
Mr. Takano is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my question, I take offense at the chairman's opening statement with these baseless and frankly misleading attacks on our acting Secretary of Labor. I would like to enter into record an article entitled Deputy Secretary of Labor Pick got her start fighting for enslaved Thai garment workers. And that is why she is an icon in the AAPI community. And I think history will judge him and the senators who've held up her nomination very poorly because she held to account and also brought about legal reform for those who were enslaved and for those who enslaved and those who were the enslavers to hold them to account.
Will the gentleman yield?
I will not yield. I will continue my questions. Assistant Secretary Parker, I would like to specifically thank you for your emphasis on safety in warehouses and logistical facilities. Warehouses are the lifeline of the district that I represent. What would you say are the leading causes of injuries in warehouse and logistical facilities?
Well, certainly the leading cause, thank you for the question and appreciate your comments. Certainly the leading cause of injury in warehousing and in many industries that involve lifting, repetitive motion, are musculoskeletal injuries, ergonomic injuries. So we see nationally millions of injuries a year from workers who are handling materials, who are lifting, moving materials. And so that's certainly prevalent in warehousing, particularly where there are medium-sized packages and they have less automated processes. We also see falls. We see struck-by incidents with powered industrial trucks, forklifts more commonly is the term. We see materials falling on workers from unsafe stacking of materials. We see heat as a factor, particularly in areas like the Inland Empire, where we used to see this a lot in California if a facility wasn't air conditioned. So,
well, heat, I've heard is a concern from many of the workers in my area. Extreme heat, having to work prolonged hours with heat, not enough rest breaks. I recall touring a textile factory with former member David Cicilline of Rhode Island, actually in Massachusetts, next to Rhode Island. It was a sizable factory that focused on sewing items for sheets, pillow covers, and duvets. And prior to entering the factory, I expected to encounter a stuffy interior with all the machinery going and all of that. However, I was pleasantly surprised to encounter a cool air coming from the circulated AC system. This highlighted for me that really good employers know what they have to do to protect workers. Protecting workers with adequate break and rest protections and air conditioning is not rocket science. Austin, Houston, and Dallas all experienced campaigns that resulted in local ordinances for rest and break requirements. The state of Texas has attempted to supersede these ordinances, and the issue is currently being litigated. While we have some states like Texas that are trying to go backwards, we do know that good employers exist who are aiming to do the right by their employees. Factories such as the Matuque factory, which I visited, are emblematic of this. And by the way, all this cool air is being generated by renewable energy. They invested in this renewable energy even when the utilities were not really encouraging that to happen. Mr. Parker, what steps, if any, and by the way, I would challenge the gentlelady from Illinois to work in extreme heat on a farm for protracted hours and see whether or not she thinks that workers should be protected from extreme heat. And I challenge you to do that. I challenge you to go work on a farm under extreme heat conditions. Mr. Parker, what steps, if any, can OSHA take to potentially incentivize employers like Matuk to take actions like these, or employers to emulate what Matuk has done?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we are learning from our conversations with employers is that there's more and more evidence out there that that providing rest actually can lead to productivity gains. And so, you know, workers slow down when they're overheated. They have they're more prone to less mental focus, so there's more mistakes in their work. And so there is some emerging evidence that if you address these things, you actually have productivity gains that can have some effect in offsetting the time it takes to provide employers with rest breaks. So there's also a lot of technical assistance that we can provide employers on how to promote a range or implement a range of options to ensure that their workers are doing the basic things like drinking enough water, taking breaks in a cooler location, that there's some acclimation or acclimation is taken into account. I mean, most of these deaths from heat happen during the first week on the job.
Thank you, and I yield back.
I'll now recognize the representative from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman.
Yeah, I have a variety of questions to ask you. First of all, apparently there's a possibility of granting union representative access to a non-union job site without a collective bargaining agreement. What are the safety-related advantages of giving somebody access like that, or are there dangers, and how do you align the idea of giving access to these people with your goal of improving workplace safety?
Well, our goal is to implement the OSHA Act, and the OSHA Act calls for strong worker participation. And what we have seen over the course of the 52 years since the signing of the OSHA Act is that there is less and less worker participation. And so we are interested in making sure that we have regulations that follow the law. We have current regulations that place restrictions on who can be an authorized representative that do not exist in the OSHA Act, and we don't think were intended. So regardless of whether it's a union representative or some other third party, if they have knowledge or expertise, whether it's technical or real-world experience that can contribute to that inspection.
You're going to allow people in even if the business doesn't want them?
Well, the employees have a right to designate a representative, and so yes. But there are also important protections in place that are not part of our rulemaking and remain undisturbed. So if a representative is disruptive to the proceeding, if they would not contribute to the proceeding, if their entry into a workplace would compromise trade secrets, then in those cases that person would not be permitted to be a part of the inspection, or they would be excluded from any relevant.
I'm going to switch a little bit. How much do you think the proposed heat standard would cost small business in this country?
We don't have a number on that because we haven't written a proposal on that. We have gone to the SBA and convened a small business committee and given them a range of options rather than a prescriptive proposal, so that we can get a fuller range of feedback from small business about what is practical. So we're very mindful of the costs and putting measures in place that are going to be achievable for small business. And we've really, I'm proud that we've taken an approach that OSHA's never done in the rulemaking, which is to go to small business with open-ended questions, to hear from them about what they think makes sense, rather than giving them a set of rules that they have to respond to. So we're actually hearing from them and hearing their ideas and hearing what they're doing now to protect workers. It's quite exciting to be part of that process.
The permanent COVID-19 standard in healthcare settings has been under review since December 7th. Since that time, the administration has ended both the public health emergency and the national emergency for COVID. Does your administration have a plan to move ahead with this burdensome regulation, given other COVID regulations have been rolled back?
Right now, the status is that it is under OMB review, so I cannot make predictions or.
Are you guys trying to extend it, though?
It's under interagency review and an OMB process, and we're engaged with OMB, and a decision will come from that process about what happens.
Obviously, we know a lot more about the COVID situation. Maybe the press tries to cover it up, but more about both the masks, more about the vaccinations than we did at the time. And I think most of at least the things that I'm reading are the masks weren't all ever cracked up to be, the vaccinations weren't all they're cracked up to be. Could you comment on businesses that are requiring, or do you have to take a position on businesses pushing their employees towards masking and vaccinating?
You know, the OSHA Act places primary responsibility on employers to come up with health and safety programs and systems. And so if an employer makes a decision that they believe that they need to
I guess what I'm saying is, I'm almost out of time. There are people who come up to me in my district. They only got the vaccine because their employers forced them to. Now they regret it. They feel they're having bad symptoms or whatever. Is that something OSHA is concerned about?
You know, I think I'd love to hear more about that and how we could be helpful. I think, but we're not really engaged in active rulemaking in general workplaces on that issue anymore.
Okay, thank you.
I recognize the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Assistant Secretary Parker, for appearing before our subcommittee today to highlight the vital work that OSHA carries out each and every single day in workplaces across America. I know we agree that a good job cannot truly be a good job without safety. From semiconductor fabs and electric vehicle battery plants to construction and open air agricultural farming, the challenges we expect OSHA to meet and offer answers to are extremely diverse, wide-ranging, and numerous. And certainly much has changed since OSHA was established 53 years ago in 1970. Innovation and technological advancement have overhauled many workplaces across the United States, a trend which is set to continue with the return of industrial policy. For example, just last month, the Department of Energy announced $15.5 billion that will be made available to turbocharge a massive factory retooling initiative, particularly in our automotive industry. And these dollars are set to transform auto plants across the United States. This is so vitally important to my native Michigan, and help support the production of clean and efficient vehicles right here at home. And it's going to be up to OSHA to make sure that these converted facilities meet the highest safety standards and that employees working there are informed of potential hazards and are trained to recognize them. While these workplaces are modernizing, the core demands and expectations of workers remain the same: good pay, strong benefits, and a safe workplace. So whether it is air conditioning going into UPS delivery trucks or PPE and a comprehensive review of the chemicals used in EV battery plants, workplace safety has never been more important for hardworking Americans in unions like the Teamsters and the United Auto Workers. So Assistant Secretary Parker, as you are aware, and as is being discussed, we may be just a few days away from another Republican shutdown of the government. And I wanted to take a minute to request unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the American Federation of Government Employees explaining the consequences of a government shutdown for OSHA.
Without objection.
Thank you. As we know, another Republican shutdown will impact worker safety. We've heard this directly from AFGE. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Assistant Secretary, will OSHA still be able to conduct its strategic enforcement program in meatpacking and poultry plants if we are in a Republican shutdown?
Thank you for the question. It is an important one. I think the short answer is no. Strategic meaning proactive and preventive inspections. Our mandate would be limited under the Anti-Efficiency Act or the Appropriations Act to matters involving life or property, and that has always been interpreted to mean actionable knowledge. So reacting to a hazard that has been reported, that we have actual knowledge of, reacting to a complaint, reacting to an injury, reacting to a fatality. So we would not be doing proactive inspections.
And
I would add also that we're not gonna be distributing, we're not gonna have any money to distribute to the state who run their own state plans. So there won't be, Michigan won't get a check from OSHA when the time comes if we're shut down.
And OSHA just announced a new strategic enforcement program this week on silica dust exposures in manufactured stonework. Will that work be able to continue in a Republican shutdown?
That will not get off the ground, and that is very concerning to me. We first worked on this issue when I was in California after finding workers who had worked 10 years in this industry, had not even reached the age of 40, and were dead in the ground from silicosis. And we need to take action on this, and it's extremely, gravely concerning that this effort is going to be delayed.
Yeah, we need to take action and make sure that government can still function for the workers and the individuals who rely on it. And I want to thank you for your dedication to that charge. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Parker, your agency was responsible for issuing an employer vaccine mandate that would have applied to 84 million Americans. Now, the Supreme Court struck that down. It was a scathing opinion about how OSHA had well exceeded its authority in unprecedented ways. Earlier today, you testified that you didn't demand that anyone be fired. So in your contemplation, if a worker did not comply with the requirements of that vaccination or test rule that you promulgated, what would have happened? What would have been the consequence for that employee?
Well, the question that I received earlier from the Congresswoman from Illinois referenced our activity after the ruling was issued. And so it was a reference to our efforts post-Supreme Court decision.
So pre-Supreme Court decision, you did demand that people be fired?
The rule never went into...
Right, but the rule as you wrote it, as you contemplated, as you wanted to go into effect, it did contemplate people be fired.
It was up to the employer. It didn't prescribe any remedies in the rule for how that would be implemented.
The Supreme Court noted that hundreds of thousands of people could have lost their jobs. You disagree with that?
The Supreme Court was making a preliminary decision. It wasn't a final order. They had a limited record in front of them. But
you see,
I would have to go back and reread the ruling. I don't recall that provision.
Mr. Parker, you're one of a number now of officials in this administration who has come before this committee and tried to tell us that 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4. Sitting in the chair that you're in now, the Secretary of Education testified, gave false testimony to this committee, denying that he had promoted a student vaccine mandate when he had done precisely that. Sitting in the chair that you're in now, the Secretary of Health and Human Services made one of the most outlandish statements ever entered into the congressional record, which is saying quite a lot, when he said, "We never forced anyone to do anything in relation to the widely discredited policy of forcing young children as young as 2 years old to wear masks." And now you come before us today, asked about one of the most sweeping abuses of power that we've seen, that was rebuked by the Supreme Court, and you tell us that we didn't demand that anyone be fired. So has there been some sort of memo going around? Why is the administration insistent on rewriting history?
All you have to do is read that rule, and you will see that it is not a vaccine mandate. It gives employees the option of testing in lieu of a vaccine mandate.
And if they didn't do that, then what would happen to them?
They would be out of compliance with the requirement, and our role then would be to cite the employer
I want to I want to clarify your earlier testimony as well. Are you saying that your agency is still pushing forward with a new COVID-19 rule for healthcare at this time?
The rule is we proposed that rule well, I don't recall.
I didn't ask when you initially proposed it. I'm saying, are you still pushing forward with it?
We submitted the rule to the Office of Management and Budget in December of last year. It has remained in review there.
So you're not planning on rescinding it or withdrawing it?
That's a decision that would be made after it goes through the process, and I can't comment on it. That's just...
You can't comment? You don't have an opinion of whether it should be withdrawn?
It's not a matter of opinion. It's a matter of me following the rules of the administration.
Sure.
In ensuring that we respect the process of working with OMB.
Did your agency at all delay or pause its rulemaking or regulatory agenda following the nomination of Julie Su as Secretary of Labor?
I don't believe so. All of our work internally continued.
Okay, how would you describe morale at the department right now?
You know, we are still working to address a real malaise that was in place at the Department of Labor in the prior administration.
Do you think that having an unconfirmed Secretary of Labor who the Senate has considered and chosen not to confirm has had a negative impact on the morale at the Department of Labor?
I can't speculate on that, really. I think that from the people I talk to, the answer is no. They're continuing to do their work for the American people. That's their mission. That's what they care about.
But you were confirmed by the Senate for your role, and she hasn't been for yours, and you're reporting to her. Does that create some awkward dynamics?
She was confirmed by the Senate.
Not for the role she's in right now, was she?
Well, my understanding is that as deputy, she serves in the role as acting
But she
secretary.
hasn't been confirmed as Secretary of Labor. That's correct.
Certainly correct, yes.
And has that created any, difficult dynamics around the department in your direct observation?
Not in my direct observation, no.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Scott for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, is it true that under your present funding that you can only inspect each business under your jurisdiction once every 190 years?
I believe that that is a figure from the Death on the Job report by the AFL-CIO that they release annually on Worker Memorial Day. And I haven't checked the math lately, but I've checked the math multiple years in the past, and that they were right. So I have no reason to dispute that that's the fact.
So that the proposed cuts in the Republican budgets would make that even worse. Is that true?
That's certainly true.
And if they have a shutdown, you indicated that you wouldn't be able to do your work. Have you had to spend staff time preparing for the shutdown?
Everyone has to spend staff time preparing for the shutdown, and unfortunately, it is a regular exercise in government.
Some disparaging remarks were made about staff, some of the budget proposals to add staff for regulatory staff. How long did it take to get regulations done for silica and beryllium?
At least 20 years.
And if you had more staff, could you have done a quicker job?
Certainly.
In terms of regulations, we've had legislation pending to reduce workplace violence. What kinds of regulations could OSHA propose that could save lives and reduce injuries? It's my understanding that these would be fairly innocuous, like make sure you have a plan to reduce violence, not anything that would be overburdensome.
It would be difficult to predict what a rule would look like that we haven't worked on or proposed, but I can talk about, to answer your point, we can look at our efforts in healthcare and draw some analogies because we are doing rulemaking in the area of healthcare. And I would agree, our focus is on established practices, best practices that exist in the healthcare industry that have to do with adequate staffing in particular circumstances, things like line of sight, panic buttons, things that are certainly manageable in that context.
And in regulations involving heat stress, you mentioned things like shade and water. Those don't seem particularly burdensome. Are they effective in reducing deaths and injuries for heat stroke?
They are highly effective in reducing the risk of heat stroke, as well as just people understanding how to recognize signs in themselves and others, and understanding the elevated risk when you're new to the exposure, so you're new on the job or there's a heat wave. Pretty common sense issues.
Do you have jurisdiction over child labor?
We have jurisdiction over children exposed to hazardous conditions at work. The Department of Labor has jurisdiction over child labor.
What is the situation there? Has it gotten better or worse recently?
We see more reports of child labor, and we see a troubling increase in workers who are underage being exposed to higher hazard workplaces. I get heartbreaking emails in my inbox all too often of workers 13, 14, 15. They lose an arm in a poultry processing plant, or they're pulled into a wood chipper, or just things that you don't even want to hear about.
Lots been said about the COVID vaccine, and comment was made about an experimental COVID vaccine. Do you have any authority to impose any requirement for any medication that doesn't have final approval from the FDA?
I believe that I'd have to check with our legal counsel on that, but in normal circumstances, the answer, I think, is no.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The representative from Michigan, Mr. Waldron, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to you, Mr. Parker, for being here. On November 26th, 2019, a farmer and friend in my district tragically fell to his death while trying to fix a hole that had developed from a storm in the roof of his family farm. Fell through it. It wasn't found till a significant amount of time later by his brother, who came to look for him since he hadn't returned to the field. He was the owner and operator working with his brother. While the family was still grieving, Michigan OSHA, levied thousands of dollars worth of fines on the family for failing to report the death within 8 hours. The family was dealing with the emotional loss of a brother and a husband, and the last thing I'm sure that a wife was considering was picking up the phone to call OSHA hotline to report the death of her spouse, as you might understand. Since 1976, Congress has approved an appropriations rider stating businesses with 10 employees or fewer, including small family farms, are exempt from the OSH Act's injury and incident reporting requirement. Efforts to reduce the penalty at the state level were vetoed by Governor Whitmer, saying that doing so would be inconsistent with how federal OSHA regulates small farms. Do you believe, Mr. Parker, small family farms with less than 10 employees should be held to the same standards as large businesses?
Well, as you know, under the appropriations rider, we don't have jurisdiction for much of our activity on small family farms with fewer than 10 employees. The only exception is if there's a temporary labor camp on site. Let me also just offer my condolences for your friend. That's a horrible incident. I will say that we have, I don't know the circumstances of the jurisdictional questions in that case, I do know that while we do issue penalties for reporting violations because there's an important policy reason that we're able to respond to deaths in a timely manner, there are circumstances such as that where we have been known to issue citations without penalty because of the trauma. So I think
I guess I'd follow up on that to make sure I understand. Do the OSHA inspectors have discretion in these type of situations? And if an OSHA inspector did this, offered discretion in a case like this at the federal level, would you view that as appropriate?
we would look at that on a case-by-case basis, and that would be not really the final decision wouldn't be with the inspector, but we would look at that at the supervisor level.
We wouldn't necessarily go to immediate penalty of thousands of dollars for a wife not reporting her husband's death.
That's correct. But let me be clear. I don't know the circumstances. I don't want to, and I don't know Michigan's policies, and I don't want to disparage them. I can only talk about what we do. And
sadly, Michigan's policy still would require this wife, in a grieving situation, within 8 hours of her husband falling through a roof, trying to repair it, preventing further storm damage, to report or pay thousands of dollars. So I guess in asking at the federal level, which will determine whether we move this direction somehow to give some reality to how OSHA works with states like Michigan OSHA, would it be appropriate to lengthen the reporting requirement in cases like this one I described when someone loses a family member? I'm looking for a policy.
I don't know that. I'd have to evaluate that more and talk to our team. I don't know that necessarily more rulemaking is the right answer as opposed to
Common sense.
Just an approach of ensuring that we always include, humanity in our approach to our work.
I appreciate that, and I hope that we truly can provide greater clarity at the federal level and prevent these types of unfortunate events in the future, because we know that the state OSHAs look in a great degree to what federal OSHA sets as standards of practice. And in this case, I would think discretion would be common sense as the first step, unless we saw something that was egregious in undercutting what should be done in reporting requirements that make sense. We'll keep looking. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Without objection, there being no further business, the subcommittee stands adjourned.